One Nation's been the only consistent political party for the last 20 years.
They're not talking about you. All right, well, let me tell you, One Nation is talking about you.
Looks like the media's run away from One Nation. They're too scared to ask us any questions, mainly because we're straight talkers and we've got the answers.
This is like a call to arms. You guys need to start making the real decisions and who you're going to vote for.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the ExCandidates. My name is Stephen Tripp and I'm joined by Adam Zara. How are you, Adam?
I'm pretty good, thanks, Stephen. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And we're very excited. We're always very excited, but especially excited this week because we have a lady on. Her name is Kerry White, who's an Aboriginal elder. So we're going straight to the source and we're going to speak to Kerry about issues relating to the voice and other Aboriginal issues. How are you tonight, Kerry?
I'm very good, thank you.
So you're an elder. Oh, thank you. So you're an elder of the Narungga people. Is that how pronouncing it correctly?
It's actually pronounced Narungga, and I'm not actually a Narungga elder. I've worked with Aboriginal people all over South Australia, Northern Territory and Western Australia. And it's the Aboriginal people from North, because I'm also Atnamatna, and I worked with the Alice Springs Indigenous people, and they made me an elder.
Oh, okay.
Right? So I'm an elder, but I'm not a Narungga elder.
Okay. So what does being an elder, what does that involve?
To be an elder, you have to be a role model for your community. You have to be able to teach the young ones and also educate the adults. Of course, you can't be an alcoholic or a gambler or take drugs or any of those sorts of things. So when people look at you, like our Aboriginal people look at like me, for instance, they see me as a role model, someone that they can look up to, someone that they can respect, and that, you know, when I talk to them about drug issues or alcohol issues or any of those things, I'm doing it out of respect, and also I'm not a hypocrite.
Yeah, because you wouldn't want to be, an alcoholic or running around and gambling and spending all your money and then trying to preach the opposite. So,
like that's right. Because if I did those things and then I spoke to someone about their alcoholism, the first thing they're going to tell me is get further down the road because, you know, you're telling me to do, not to do what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
You said that you were saying that you worked with Aboriginal people. What were you doing? What type of work were you doing?
Originally, I was a nurse. I started my career when I left school as a nurse. And I did that up until I got married, and then I ran my own business with my then partner. And then when that split up, then I went back into working in health, and I also worked for the welfare, and I worked with Aboriginal organisations. I was the CEO of one of the organisations that I worked for, Aboriginal organisation. And so basically, working in health, I was working with the Aboriginal communities on a range of health issues, but also I was working with the community to help them get into apprenticeships. And, you know, some of the Aboriginal people that came to our group ended up working in health as well, which was absolutely fantastic. and we had some of our young ones, as young as 13, turn up to do the apprenticeship in mining, in the mining industry, because they were taking on Aboriginal people and training them in the hopes that they continued working for them, of course. So, you know, we had quite a few successful programs like that. But also, I've been an advisory, on health advisory committees. I've served on hospital boards as the Aboriginal representative to get services that we needed for not just Aboriginal people. I'm Aboriginal, but I don't just advocate for Aboriginal people. It's people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and that could be Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, all the issues that Aboriginal people were facing, the people from low socioeconomic backgrounds were also facing those same issues.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to quickly ask you one thing. When I spoke to you on the phone, I was saying Indigenous people, and you kind of quickly came back, no, we are Aboriginal people. We want to be classified Aboriginal. Can you just go into that a little bit?
That is correct. And that was going to come up a little bit later in what I was going to go through, but I'll address that for you. Indigenous, if you look up the meaning of the word Indigenous, that is anyone native to Australia,
Right.
including flora and fauna. If it's you're born in Australia, you're Indigenous because you were born in this country.
Okay. Well,
So
I feel that way as well.
That is, well, put it this way: if you changed Chinese people's name to something else, do you think that they would be very happy about it? You're taking their culture away from them, from who they are. It's part of them.
It does feel like a very dismissive term, because I feel the same way. Like, I'm born in Australia, I'm Australian, and
That's right.
basically
You're
I'm
Indigenous to
Indigenous.
this country.
Exactly right. And it doesn't matter what race, color, or credo you are. You're born
That's
here.
right.
This is you. And I just
That's
feel like it's kind of washing, as you said, it does that. The word Indigenous is kind of like a scientific term that really decategorizes you or me or anybody from your heritage and from your culture.
Yes, it disenfranchises us.
Yeah.
It's what it does. You know, and
Exactly.
all this, what they like to call political correctness.
Yeah, well, I found that political correctness is something to offend the majority, to appease the minority. That's what political correctness seems to be these days.
That's right. And the other term that they use for us is First Nations.
Yeah.
And First Nations, that's Canadian.
Oh,
We are not Canadian.
right.
We are Aboriginal. We are from Australia and the Torres
Okay.
Strait.
Well, then I can turn around now and call Aboriginal people and feel very comfortable about it, that I'm doing the right by the people and the culture.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'll just explain something to you there. Right now, when it comes to Aboriginal people, we have two separate lots of. I mean, we have a lot of Aboriginal mobs, not tribes, not clans, mobs. That's Aboriginal term, across Australia, right? But that is divided into two, and that is rural and remote, and we are separate from the cityites.
Oh,
They are totally different to us.
okay. And what are the differences? What's the differences between the rural and cityites?
Well, the rural and remote, They tend to practice their culture, not everything in their culture, because like some Aboriginal people, they don't like the initiation. When young boys get to the age of 12, they get initiated, right? So instead of being considered as a 12-year-old, they are now considered as an adult. And parents didn't want their children initiated because it took the control of their children away from them. So, if they said that the child couldn't go out at night, well, the child can tell the parent, go to hell because I'm an adult now. I can do what I like.
Okay.
So, these are the things. And, you get all these activists and they're all from the city, basically. And they're all promoting their own self-interest. It's not because people in rural and remote Australia, we don't care about those issues that they're protesting about and making a big deal about. We have no interest in that whatsoever. What we are concerned about is the drug and alcohol issues and the gambling issues and, not having access to work for our community members. And, it's pretty hard to get a job out in remote Australia. But, everyone goes, well, that Aboriginal people are lazy. Well, no, they're not. They would like to, make their communities better. They like being in their communities. And so what they would like is for us to have more work out into those communities. And there's a lot of areas where they can get work in those communities, by getting trained in like drug and alcohol and domestic violence and all these sorts of things. And then you've got Aboriginal people that are trained that can go into their communities and work with their own people. And that has shown to have a lot of success. And I'll just give you an example of, a couple of examples actually, of how we've been able to do that, because the Aboriginal leaders and the elders over at Sejuna and up in the Northern Territory, they actually lobbied for the cashless debit card. I suppose you've heard of it.
Yep.
And that was to get 80-20. So 80% of their income was cashless. So they could only use their debit card and they couldn't get, alcohol and various things like that, right? And the other 20% was cash. So what that did was that reduced the incidences of domestic violence and alcohol abuse and gambling and drug addiction. And it actually was better not just for the Aboriginal people. In some of these areas, they were living in mixed communities, so they was living with non-Aboriginal people and Aboriginal communities. So it made it better because it reduced the amount of violence that was going on for both, for everyone, for businesses and everyone. And then out in remote, in the top part of South Australia, the communities out there, the Aboriginal, they didn't subscribe to the cashless debit card, but what they did was they made their communities dry zones. So you couldn't take alcohol in there. So then all that violence tend to become less and less. I mean, you're still going to get violence because people argue about all sorts of things, but it significantly reduced the violence that caused by alcohol.
So the cashless debit card, in your view, was definitely a good thing and actually empowered the Aboriginal people to try and help their situation and community?
Yes, it was. And that's not just my view. The Aboriginal elders and that over at Sejuna, they pushed for it over there. I mean, you can confirm that with I don't know what's his name, Rowan Ramsey, that you because he was involved in that because it had to go through Parliament, and he was actually involved in that when they first brought it out. But the problem was, as soon as Albanese got voted into government, they scrapped it. They scrapped the whole thing.
Get rid of it.
And have you heard reports from other elders in the communities and stuff that since it's been scrapped that things are starting to go backwards? Or is it too soon to
No,
tell?
I haven't actually caught up with them yet, but I don't need to because Aboriginal people, we have our own little grapevine. So everything travels by word of mouth, basically. And as we are a nomadic people, in effect, because we go from, like I live down south in Pirie, but we go up to Port Augusta, and we've got relatives up north, and they come down. So they bring all the information down of what's going on. And I've got two cousins up there at the moment in the Territory that work in the Territory and the Torres Strait, and they help women that are suffering domestic violence. So I get information on how that's going, come back, and I also get information on other things that are happening in Alice and up in the Territory, because I've got relatives up there that we go and see, and Alice Springs mob that's actually not related to me, but they're from the Territory, live in Pirie. So they bring information back from their communities that spread around in the Northern Territory. So in effect, I'm up to date pretty much with what's happening in the Northern Territory and South Australia all the way through.
Wow. So it's like faster than the internet can travel, it sounds. The grapevine's still better technology, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. Yes.
I've got. I don't know if Stephen's got a quick question. I was gonna shift it over to. I'm just gonna shift it over to the voice, and I just guess my first question is, just without getting into it and starting to talk about any details of the voice, for or against the voice, personally.
It's a no, against.
Because that'll just save our viewers. That'll save our viewers having to really scroll through and all that kind of stuff, so they can go, okay, they're talking about the voice now, and we can say at the 18-minute mark, okay, we've got Kerry's opinion straight away on, well, there we go, it's a no. So now what we can do is unpack the no and start to ask questions about why no. So
Well, before we get too far into it, there's a couple of other issues that I would like to raise, and it's to do with the voice, right? It carries on, and your viewers should be able to join the dots to get a full picture. Okay. Now, I guess you've heard of the Uluru Statement.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, the Uluru mob, they do not agree with the Uluru Statement. They never wanted it, they weren't consulted on it, and they're not happy about it. And how that Uluru Statement came about was due to the Wilson family, which is actually from down south here. Nothing to do with up there. They were from down south. Anyway, they moved up to Alice Springs, and they're the ones that became activists and pushed for the Uluru thing. And they got the Uluru Statement and had Uluru handed back to the Aboriginal people. Well, in effect, what that did was it ruined the lives of the Uluru people, because they used to love taking people up onto the rock, talking to them about their culture. They had a nice little cottage industry going at the base of the rock, doing their artwork and all different stuff, making stuff. And all that went. They lost a lot. So they're now kicking up about it, and they also say no to the voice. They do not want it.
A theme that seems to be emerging in talking to you is we're told that, or it's kind of implied that Aboriginal people are all on the same page and they need to be represented because they all have the same views and the same voice. But from speaking to you, no, there's actually all these different mobs, and the mobs don't necessarily agree with each other. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, before white men settled in Australia, there was a large number of mobs, and they lived in different areas of Australia. Now, they used to fight with each other for various reasons. But also, they used to come together because women had to go from one mob to another mob, so you didn't have interbreeding.
Yeah.
So when they all agreed that, okay, we're going to put our differences aside so we can come together and sort out skin groups, is what they call them. So if you belong to a particular skin group, you can't have a relationship or marry anyone from that same skin group because you're related. That's how we know who our relatives are, by skin name. So, so they might argue about different things. But when it comes to like the Uluru Statement, well, that was only the Uluru mob that affected. That didn't affect anyone else. But they weren't consulted about it. And no other Aboriginal mob was consulted about it either. I mean, if they had have understood what was in the statement, they probably would have said yes or maybe no, so that it didn't get pushed on to the Uluru people, which is basically what happened. So then there's the voice, right? Now, the Alice Springs mob, their culture is a little bit different to us down south, right? And they might get together and have a couple of drinks and end up having a punch up because they don't like each other. But when it comes to the voice, then they unite. They come together. When it's an issue affecting all Aboriginal people, not just one particular mob, then we all come together.
Okay.
That is amazing, and it's very much like a family. I know, like my European heritage.
We are a family. Now, out of respect, we call men or women that are older than like myself. I would call them uncle or auntie. Now, they might not be blood relatives, but it's uncle and auntie, and that's to show respect. Because at the end of the day, we are all Aboriginal. We are all one people. It's just like Australia. We're multicultural. We might have difference of opinions, might even argue with, different ones. But at the end of the day, we are all Australian. And we should all have each other's backs.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that, and I think that's what myself and I think Senator Hanson and One Nation has actually kind of been stating that, and we get caught up in being called racists and all those kind of things, but actually we are similar, kind of saying similar things to you. that you're saying actually. But you did raise an interesting point about education, and I was with the education. What is your feelings on the education system and how that the majority of children are being taught about the indigenous, the Aboriginal culture? Because even I was a student of the 80s, and we were never told that you guys were like in like mobs and fought each other, just as traditional like tribes in Africa and things would fight and over like food and maybe like land or territory. We're told, and more and more so now with the woke ideology that Aboriginals were utopian. They all got on. They all had the same voice, and this is what they seem to be teaching in our schools. How do you feel about that kind of misappropriate teaching? Really, I mean, what's wrong with the heritage of being in mobs and being territorial and doing and actual real history? I've learned something new today from you.
Yeah, well, as far as the education system goes, it sucks, to put it bluntly. It totally sucks. And now a few years ago, the government, they got up there and prostrated themselves saying, that they wanted to keep Aboriginal children in schools. And then they blamed Aboriginal kids for not attending school, when in fact the teachers were the problem, because you get little 6 and 7-year-olds, they get sent to school by their parents, and then they'd have a dispute with one of the other little Aboriginal kids at the school, and the first thing the teacher does is send them home. They don't keep them in school. Government's saying, gotta keep them in school, but they're sending them home. They weren't getting an education. And anyway, so I had a disagreement with the headmaster up there. I mean, he was a lovely bloke, and I just stated my case, about what the government says and what the education department's doing. And I couldn't change the whole education system, but at least I changed it in that school. And the teachers had to get a bit of cultural background about, the Aboriginal children that they were teaching there. And the elders up there were very good, because they used to take the school, teachers and the kids, take them out and show them how Aboriginal people hunted food, how they gathered food, and then have a barbecue out bush, cook up a kangaroo and root tail and that sort of stuff. And so, the teachers got an understanding of what Aboriginal children were taught and, part of their culture. And you can't stop them from being part of their culture.
So learning culture and learning, like obviously reading and writing and mathematics to try and help them be successful in the future.
Yeah, you need all those things. I mean, the Aboriginal education thing, that was only a small part of the whole picture. Because what we basically wanted was for Aboriginal kids to go through, get a good education, go to university if they wanted to, or go to trade school, or do a TAFE course to get them into some other profession. So then they could lead productive lives. Because when people are unemployed, they got too much time on their hands, so it ends up being, destructive, rather than proactive.
Yeah. So if we can just go back to the voice. Now you're an elder. Have you been consulted on the voice and what it would mean for Aboriginal people, or is this?
Look, Aboriginal people have got no understanding. Well, some of them think it's going to be based on the Uluru Statement, right? Which they don't want. And others are saying it's going to be based on ACSIC, which was a complete failure. a complete and utter failure. And then you get, educated people like myself. We listen to what Albanese put out, and we're not too happy about that either, because that's going to open up a whole can of worms, because you're going to have before I get to that, I'll just explain something to you. Okay. Now, 200 years ago, or a bit over 200 years ago, they rounded Aboriginal people up and locked them on missions, right? So Aboriginal people were segregated from white society. Then we come forward to now, the voice, and they're segregating us again.
Yeah.
They're taking us back 200 years. We don't want, Aboriginal, two races, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal. You're dividing the country again. It's back to segregation. And frankly, that is racist towards our white brothers and sisters that live in this land with us.
Well, that's exactly right, because in 1901, Aboriginals were able to vote. So they've been voting for over 100 years. And that means that they have equal footing. Well, they have footing just like everybody else, as you say, the white brothers and sisters, to vote and have a say on who's going to represent them in Parliament, federally and state. And then in 1967, there was an amendment to the referendum.
Yes.
And then that actually removed the specific mention of the Aboriginal people, therefore removing segregation from the Constitution.
That's it.
And
it made our Constitution colourblind.
Yes.
And now what they're trying to do again, especially with the Greens and all that kind of and with Albanese in the Labor government, to me it does seem like they're actually being trying to, like what you were just saying before, they're going to put Aboriginal people back into something that was taken away 80 years ago, that shouldn't really be in there, because as you were saying, it should be all of us.
That's right. Apart from that, then it opens up a whole different can of worms, because Albanese hasn't really said what this voice is going to look like, and what he drafted was actually illegal. He never went before the Attorney General or anything. So, they were trying to just push it through, sneak it through under the rug, and that can be altered. At any point in time, that can be altered. So no one knows what it's eventually will end up looking like, right? I mean, it could end up that it being legal battles in the court because the voice disagrees with a proposal that the government puts forward. So then you end up with all these legal battles, and that's going to cost the taxpayer lots and lots of money. I mean,
That's right.
we've got that many. We're in an economic crisis. People have got nowhere to live. They're living in tents and their cars. They can't afford their food, and this is going to get worse and worse. Why can't we be spending money on that instead of stupid climate change, which is just a whole heap of propaganda? You got to follow the money on all these things, and then the government is going to. I mean, Aboriginal people have the worst health in the country, right? And now the government is planning to sign Australia's health system over to the WHO.
Yeah.
I mean, what on earth are they thinking?
Well, I've said this as soon as I heard about that. I said, look, Australia, we're smart enough. We have enough resources. We have the know-how and the people. We should be looking after ourselves and all people. And I can't understand why we would hand anything over to a global organisation with unelected bureaucrats and then let them think that they know what's best for us.
That's
so
correct.
it's I mean, we should be listening to people like yourself, especially in health. I mean, been on the front line, being a nurse, and now saying that in your experience, and I know the statistics also show that Aboriginal people have the worst kind of health compared to everyone else, right? Like, we should be really tackling that. Like, a big issue that we had in New South Wales was that the Premier was going to spend $25 million to put a third flagpole up on the harbour bridge so that they could fly the Aboriginal flag. Yet we've got people in northern New South Wales who are still, like you were saying, living in tents because of floods. We've still got, Aboriginal people who are, I know in Redfern and in, even in inner city districts and stuff like that, where, there is a big that money could be used so much better than having a flag flown on a bridge. And I think that, virtual signalling is cancerous, and it takes issue away from the main problems and the main issues that need to be addressed.
Yeah, well, I mean, Aboriginal, as I said before, Aboriginal people have the worst health outcomes in the country. Okay, but now with the economic crisis that we're facing, and more and more people are having to live in tents, live in their cars, or overcrowding in homes because of shortage of housing, and the government bringing in another 200,000 migrants, when we can't home our own people. The um, the what it's going to do to the health system. They were complaining during COVID that our health system couldn't cope. You imagine with living in all these conditions, all the health issues that are going to be coming up, and people not being able to afford food, so they're not eating properly, and then that's going to put an even bigger strain on our health system. And all they're worrying about is spending like $75 million on the voice that the Aboriginal people don't want. And we don't want a divided Australia. We don't want a racist constitution. And, we want people in Australia to have better health outcomes, have a home to live in. And rents have gone through the roof. Low income people on Centrelink and low incomes, they can't afford it. So the government is creating so many problems. They've never fixed one yet.
With the health outcomes and the health issues that Aboriginals face, what are some of the major issues health-wise compared to, other Australians that they are facing? Because we're all people, we're all red-blooded. I mean, what are the big health issues that do need addressing with Aboriginals?
With Aboriginal people, it's mostly linked to diabetes. We have a high rate of diabetes amongst Aboriginal people. And then heart attack was a heart conditions, heart problems. That began to rise about 15 years ago. We started seeing our community, Aboriginal communities members, start dropping like flies with heart attacks and heart problems, and then they end up on dialysis. And of course, that puts a big strain on the family, when they've got to go to dialysis 2-3 times a week. And the other thing is, especially in remote communities, we don't have the Woolies complex or big shopping complex. You have a little store, that provides some fruits and vegetables and stuff, but not much. It's mostly junk food because, and it's 3 times the price that we would pay in the city or where I am in Port Pirie. And so they can't afford that, so they're buying the junk food, which adds to the problem. And they don't have access to medical care out there. They don't have health centres and doctors and all that. They don't have that. They've got to travel sometimes 3-4 hours to get to a doctor or medical treatment if something should happen out there. Like a child breaks their arm or something. So there are quite a few problems associated with the remoteness of our communities, but it's their choice to live there, and they have schools. They have a school and they have the like little general store, but that's about it. If
So-
they need the police is 3 hours away.
So the voice is obviously taking all the attention away from all these issues that you're speaking of. If you were to be concerned,
We have Jacinta Price in Parliament, and apart from her and Warren Mundine, we've heard very little else, standing up to push back on this voice business. And what you need to understand is we Aboriginal people are a minority group. We're only a minority. We take up, that's if you're true Aboriginal people, and I'll get to that in a sec too. We take up only 3.2% of Australia if you go by the census, right? So if the whole lot of us voted no against this voice, we would lose.
Yeah.
We would totally lose because there's more, the other 97% of Australia that can, or 70% of Australia that can vote. If they voted yes, what are we going to do? We can't do nothing. We just got to wear it.
and then you have a voice in Parliament saying, well, this is what Aboriginal people want, this is what Aboriginal people are demanding, and you're going to be sitting there going, that's not right. Like, they can say anything and represent you, and you're not getting consulted.
Yeah, but we already have that. And this is, it is so frustrating because we got people there, they're supposed to be the Indigenous representative, as they call it, right? And they're in Parliament and they're standing up saying, we speak for all Aboriginal people. Well, no, they don't. They don't speak for any of us because they've never ever spoken to any of us.
Yep, definitely. So
It's unbelievable. Sorry, I'm just shocked. It shocks me, and I just think that why aren't people? I think people like Jacinta. See, when Jacinta Price came into the federal parliament, and then when I started hearing what she was saying, and then it was kind of validating what Pauline Hanson has been saying. You kind of turn it around and go, well. But then you will have people like Jacinta Price. Lydia Thorpe will turn around and call Pauline racist and Malcolm Roberts, and and anyone, even even Liberal senators and other people in there saying, well, that's not right. You're racist, this, that, the other. And then it's kind of like, but on the street, the people on the ground, the people who are living in the communities, are saying that they don't want it, are saying that this is not right, that we're focusing on the wrong issues. And you have 2 people so far, Jacinta Price, and you have Pauline Hanson, and also Warren Mundine is being very, very vocal about it as well, saying, no, but this is really what the people want. And then they're getting blocked out. So I could imagine what something that's constitutional and then it's not listening to the people and the Aboriginal people of the land and what they're it's saying, you know, what the city folk is saying, not what the actual rural and people are saying.
Yeah, well, you know, in Australia, according to the ABS data or census or whatever you want to look it up, there's between 800,000 and 900,000 Aboriginal people in Australia. Well, the real Aboriginal people number only half that.
Oh.
Pauline actually mentioned, and this has been a dispute for a long time, and Pauline actually mentioned it because it is important when people are thinking of the voice. Remember what I said about Indigenous, the name of what they're calling it, which means that anyone living in Australia can actually go on that committee, right? Well, Pauline brought it up, and I'm good on her because we've been trying to get this across for a long time. About there should be some form of identification proof that these people claiming to be Aboriginal are actually Aboriginal. Okay. Well, what you may not know is that back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, Aboriginal people, didn't matter how dark their skin was, we had to have proof on paper that we were Aboriginal to use any Aboriginal service that the government had set up. Every one of us had to get that proof. I've still got mine. So if you ask all these people out there that ticker boxes, we call them, right? Because about middle of 2000, about 2005, I think it was, the government scrapped it. They did away with it. So if you wanted to be Aboriginal, all you had to do was tick the box, right? So that's where the ticker box Aboriginals came from, because they didn't have to provide proof anymore. Well, you didn't have to carry that identification into a service to say, I am Aboriginal. You know, it's been proven. Like my grandfather was Aboriginal, and back in late 50s, early 60s, we used to be on a mission. We used to have to live on a mission, right? Locked up. I mean, how many of those so-called Aboriginal people claim ticker boxes actually know where their heritage is supposed to come from?
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
I've actually got some statistics here. So from the 1971 census, the total number of people identifying as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander was 116,000 to where it currently is now at 800,000. That's a 590% increase from 1971 to 2021. But even from 2016 to 2021, the national population increased by 8%, but the Indigenous population increased by 23%. So that would suggest that there are a lot of these, as you say, ticker boxes that are just saying, hey, I'm Indigenous, and jumping on the bandwagon for whatever reason. So this is a big issue, isn't it?
Yes, and it is, and it comes back to the voice. It's linked to the voice as well, because Albanese stated, and Pauline has mentioned it as well, that the government has spent billions of dollars on Aboriginal people and no outcome from it.
Yeah.
Well, if you look, they're not spending it actually on Aboriginal people, because you've got all these ticker boxes that are taking advantage of these Aboriginal programs, and the money that they give out doesn't actually go to Aboriginal people. It goes to government agents and non-government organisations. right? That's where all the money goes. They use it to pay for their buildings, to pay their workers, and all the rest of it. And the more people that they've got that will tick a box, the more funding that they'll get from the government.
So with these Aboriginal ticker boxes, what's happened is it's actually taking away funding that could well go towards creating better, healthier communities for the Aboriginals. Like, i.e., like you were saying, we can create places of employment. We can put better resourced shopping centres out in the rural regions. Make it more easier for everybody to kind of get what they need and kind of bring down health issues, start to bring down, especially getting the medical resources and all that kind of stuff out there, instead of giving $1 billion to, what did we say, 8% now of a 3% increase, so 5% say of people who are just ticking a box. That 5% of resources that are going to those people could actually go towards, which would probably equate to, $100 million at minimum, right, to actually making, a mobile hospital clinic that could go from in-states and from remote to remote communities to sort of help them with their health issues.
Here in Port Pirie, we actually got a mobile, the Rainbow Bus, it was called, and that was like a mobile clinic, and the doctors used to be on board, and health professionals used to be on board, and they used to travel to the communities, right? And so they could see the doctor, they could get health outcomes, and all that sort of stuff. We had all that, but the government, in their wisdom, cuts everything. Whenever Aboriginal people get a program of their own initiative, getting a program up and running, and you get a little bit of funding from the government, right? Like the health service got a bit of funding to do this, and then once it's up and running and it's achieving success, the government pulls the rug out from underneath you. They chop you off at the knees, take the funding.
Wow.
And they blame Aboriginal people. All this money we're giving them, and nothing's happening.
But you're saying that the businesses that are formed, or the structures that are formed from the governments to try and actually filter the money through, or that are meant to filter the money through to the Aboriginal communities, it's not getting out to you guys. So it stops basically at their front doors of the new building with all their computers and all their resources that they get and all their fancy bills.
There are very few. Uniting Care Wesley, well, I don't know about now, probably not so much now, but back in the beginning of 2000, they were actually very good. They actually gave us funding out of the funding that they got from the government. They actually gave us some funding to run programs. Were very, and Father Jim from the Catholic Church, they worked with our Aboriginal organisation, and they provided services to us for free. They did our accounting for free. So that freed up, because we had very little money, like $10,000 for 6 months running programs and actually paying the Aboriginal workers to do the work. It didn't go very far. We weren't getting the huge sums of money, hardly any funding at all from the government. And then they had ATSIC and set up the ICC, which was supposed to supply funding from ATSIC down through the ICC to community centres like the one that I was the CEO of, and various other Aboriginal organisations, to give them funding to help them get these programs up and running, but then money never came. The money did not come.
we can talk about money, but another big thing as well that is related to Aboriginal people is land rights. I heard us.
Yeah. You
Yeah, go on.
imagine what if they get this voice up and running, right? And this is something that Pauline never mentioned in her speech. Now, if they get that voice up and running, then those land rights, people living in Australia are going to be paying royalties to Aboriginal people because at the moment they've got it's kind of restricted on what they can actually do with the land. It's been handed back to Aboriginal mobs like my mob, the Narungga mob. We got given our land back ages ago, and like places in the Northern Territory and well, probably 60% of Australia have had the land given back to the Aboriginal people, and they're still going for more and more and more, and they're planning to get up to 100%. So you imagine if they get that land rights, right, and they get this voice through Parliament, people like Lydia Thorpe, they're going to be charging you royalties for living in your own house, whether you own it or not. You're going to be paying royalties.
Yeah.
So now I said this to somebody when during my federal campaign at last year, sorry. May, sorry. And it's been so long. But anyway, and what happened was, and they called me a conspiracy theorist. Now I've always said, and I'm glad I've got to speak to you today. And and this is a question that I'm going to also ask Senator Price. Was that I felt that it was a massive land grab, and what the voice will do, because we don't know how the people who are going to be in the voice are going to be elected, who's going to be appointed. They could be, as you said, not even Aboriginal people. It could be just Indigenous people, which means anyone who's born here. And then they could be approached by lobbyists, and the lobbyists could go, well, we want that hunk of land. And then what happens is, because we have lost our rights to the land, then the voice speaks for the Aboriginal people who are the owners of the land now, that they cut out the whole middleman, they cut out all the parliamentary process, and could literally say, well, guess what? Even though you've spent your $1 million on your property to buy your house and land, guess what? You're out, and we're going to take your land from you. And then what happens? Is that something is that a real risk? Is that something that you think, or that you're seeing what's happening, could be a real threat or risk to all Australian people?
I'll give you an example of small sections where the land has been given back to the Aboriginal people, right? It gets closed off. No one's allowed to go there, not even Aboriginal people. And if you want to go there, you have to pay for the privilege. So if you get all the mobs in Australia, and there's about 10 between where I live in South Australia and the Northern Territory border, imagine trying to get to Northern Territory. You got to pay a toll to everyone's land that you cross on your way.
That's highway robbery. That's robbery.
That's right. So what do you think that if they can, well, at the moment, they have to prove that they got a claim to the land, right? So they have to point out sacred sites and, burial places and all that sort of stuff. And between one mob's land and the next mob's land, there are actually landmarks which mark the end of one territory and the beginning of the next, right? So there is a bit of a process they have to go through before they can get granted their land, which the government's paying for, by the way. But if they get this voice to Parliament, Do you think they're going to stick to that, which slows the process down and then sometimes they get knocked back? Do you think they're still going to stick to that? Or do you think that they'll change all that so that they can just say, right, this is our land, you're on our land, we want royalties from you?
Yeah, I believe it. I think that's exactly what it is. I think it's a massive bypass. It's a bypass to bypass Parliament. It's a bypass the Aboriginal people. I think it's a bypass to actually bypass all Australians who own land. I just think it's a highway to stealing. I think it's just going to be an open slather of stealing the land off everybody.
Right. So that's why we're saying, you know, if you look at all these issues of how that they can change this voice at any time to suit their own agendas, and get it pushed through court if they don't like what the government's policy is or whatever, and eventually they could end up taking over, and you know, then what? What's it going to be like? It'll end up being a racist. Well, you know, there's still a lot of racism in Australia against Aboriginal people, and the more the government push things like the voice and the sorry day that we out in the country didn't want, because it's stupid to get people living in today's society to apologise for what people did 200 years ago. You know, the hypocrisy of that. And see, they get out there and they do that. And then, you know, Lydia Thorpe gets out there and she goes on and on and on about, you know, what happened 200 years ago. And she's pushing for the voice that's going to take us right back where we started. But anyway, then they can slowly work their way through the parliament, get rid of the parliament that's there now, and the voice will end up taking over. And you can call me a conspiracy theorist if you like, but I know the way that these people work, and that's what will end up happening. Aboriginal people will be running this country, and all the white people here will be paying to live here.
So I think it's pretty clear that it's definitely no to a voice.
It's a no from me. I say no to the voice. I don't want it. We, the Aboriginal people of rural and remote Australia, do not want it.
So what is important for the Aboriginal people? So if we're going to say no to the voice and we're just going to throw that out, it's off the table. What do Aboriginal people need, or is there anything that Aboriginal people need? Are you guys quite happy just being left alone? What do you actually want? Like what is the main?
We need resources to train our young Aboriginal men and women. They're keen to get involved. They're keen to become proactive in helping their communities. But, you know, the elders and the leaders can't do anything without the resources. Now, we're not necessarily asking for money, but we're asking that, you know, our young people can be trained to be able to, you know, get the experience to go back into their communities and to work with them and be paid a salary, you know, not free handouts, just, you know, get them the education so that they can get back in there and help their communities, you know, pay a wage. You know, they can't do it for free. They can't feed themselves for free. They need to be paid a wage. Therefore, gives them employment to be able to go and work with these communities. You know, so
Well,
that's what we need. We need the resources in the areas where it's needed. You know, our needs here in Port Pirie, with all the work we've done through the Aboriginal Health Advisory Council and the various boards that I've sat on and stuff, and so we were able to improve our health system. Aboriginal people here, they have their own health system, which is attached to the mainstream health system. And our Aboriginal workers that work with the Aboriginal people, they are paid a salary from the hospital, right? To go in and because Aboriginal people feel comfortable in their own space. You know, they do use mainstream services, but then you have others that just feel comfortable in their own space, you know, just like to go in and just sit down and have a cuppa and talk to the health workers about different things. And during that conversation, they might highlight a need for a referral to a service, you know, these sorts of things. We need those put out in the communities, rural and remote communities that need those sorts of things, you know. But all we need is the resources to do that. Might be just put a building up, you know, where you can have the health workers and the alcohol workers and everything there, so that the community, they can work with the community in, you know, because they know them. And no one knows Aboriginal culture like Aboriginal people, real Aboriginal people, that is. So, okay, it's the resources. Pay our Aboriginal workers a salary for doing the job. And you'd be amazed at what you can change just by doing those things. And that's just a matter of with the Aboriginal elders and leaders in the community to get them to identify what problems they're having, because what problems you're having in one community might not be the same problems that you're experiencing in a different community.
Yes, definitely. And so just quickly, I know we're coming to the end here. Is there anything else that you want to add that we haven't touched on tonight?
We were talking about we have 11 Aboriginal members in Parliament in the upper and lower house, right? Well, that equates to like 4.9% representation, Aboriginal representation in Parliament for 3.2% of the population. With that, we actually have over-representation in Parliament. So why would we need a voice? Unless they're saying that our parliamentary members are not doing their job.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, thank you very much for coming on tonight, Kerry. We've learnt so much because we're just city slickers in Sydney. We don't really encounter, you know, Aboriginal communities that are out in the outback or regional communities or whatever. So all we hear about these issues is from the media or from politicians like Lydia Thorpe or whatever. So it's up to us to really reach out to people like you so we can actually hear what's happening on the ground. And I think everything that you've put across tonight has been a tremendous eye-opener, especially just for Adam and I, and hopefully everyone listening at home as well. So we want to thank you very much for coming on, and hopefully we can have you back again in the future because there's so much we could talk about with these issues. So thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.